Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Gotham Baseball Live. I'm your host, Mark Healey, and with me, as he is each and every week, my co-host, Peter Schwartz. How are you today, Peter?
I'm doing great, Mark. And obviously, the area has been taken over by the Knicks during this run through the playoffs. And obviously, they've got the lead going into game two. So I think baseball, at least from an overall standpoint, is taking a little bit of a background, but there is plenty to talk about.
Yeah, no question. Especially yesterday, we were all, I had reached out to Brian Hoke from MLB.com. He's a friend of both of ours. I've
Mhm.
known him forever. You've known him forever. A guy who, started his career here at the Wave, believe it or not. And certainly has written for Gotham Baseball and a friend for more than 20 years for myself. And I was trying to get in touch with him yesterday, and I'm like, he's not getting back to me. Like, what's going on? And I wasn't aware of the TOS, the thoracic outlet syndrome speculation with Aaron Judge until because yesterday was deadline day here at the Wave. So I'm trying to get a newspaper out, and then finally I'm like, it's so weird that Brian wouldn't get back to me. And then I saw all the speculation. So
Right.
right, so Peter was like, well, why don't we have on a guest? So who's coming on today, Peter?
Great sports orthopedist in this area from Orlin and Cohen, Dr. James Paci, who I've had on some of my other shows and podcasts before. And originally I said to you, let's have him on. Not that he has seen Aaron Judge's
Right,
injury, but he can talk about the severity of it. And first we thought it was the thoracic outlet syndrome because that was
right,
being speculated. And I remember I texted you last night. That was what Matt Harvey had. And you said
right.
also Jeff McNeil had it as
Yes.
well. So that was the rumor going around until late last night when the Yankees released a statement that Aaron Judge has a stress fracture of the first rib on his right side. So he's going to have a period of rest, limited activity. He's going to be re-imaged again in 4 to 6 weeks. Now, I think a lot of people are confused by that. That doesn't mean he's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks. He's going to be
Right.
out longer than that.
Yes.
They're going to take another look at it in
Right.
4 to 6 weeks, and they're going to determine the level of healing that he has undergone and also the next steps. I guess the positive in all of this is that the Yankees do expect him to get back at some point this
Right.
season. And that brings upon the other question is, can the Yankees tread water? Can they stay in a playoff spot until Aaron Judge comes back? And I think we've seen them over the years when he has been out, they have been able to tread water a little bit. This is going to be a real extended period of time. And I question whether or not they can stay in first, but I do think they will stay in a playoff spot and stay in contention. The most important thing is making sure that he is healthy and back with enough time to get ready for the playoffs.
Well, it's kind of like what happened with Max Fried, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the at first it was the speculation was doom, that he was going to
Mm-hmm.
be out for the season, and then the news came, well, he's hurt, but it's not as bad as we thought, and he should be back, right? So it stinks that you're going to lose your number two starter and your best player, for an extended amount of time, but by the same token, it certainly it could be worse, right?
No, no, there's no question. Look, we've been around the sport a long time, and things have changed. You don't have to win the division to win the World Series. You
Right.
can get in. We've seen wild card teams win the World Series left and right. So, from the Yankees' perspective, at this point, they just have to figure out a way to stay in playoff contention. Obviously they're waiting for Giancarlo Stanton to get back. I'm sure Brian Cashman will go out and make some moves. So I listen, even without Aaron Judge, this is still a really good team. They just need a little bit more contributions from some people that haven't really
Right.
helped out. And they've been banged up a lot. There's other players. And look, they can always go out and make some moves. Pitching is going to be their strength. They've got to fix the bullpen. But look, if they don't get him back this season, they've got zero chance of winning a world championship. But
Right.
without him, they can still make the playoffs, but they have to have him back to be a premier team. And we'll see what happens down the road. But look, I think out the window right now is the third straight MVP and fourth in his career. That's not going to happen this year. But the most important thing now is to make sure that he's okay. And I think that was the scary thing, is that, he's been out the last few days and like, all right, what's the update? What's the update? What's going on? And the longer it went on, the longer you felt that this was not going to be very, very good news. And
Right.
it could, like you, to your point before, it could have been worse, just like with Max Fried. Again, let's see what
Right.
comes up at the end. How many games does he come back with? And can he be a factor to help the Yankees in the playoffs?
Yeah, and finally, right, I guess right about the time that the news came out about the stress fracture, that's when Brian got back to me. He said, "Sorry, buddy, I can't come on tomorrow." But
Yeah,
he said
a lot
Brian
of
said he'll definitely Brian said he'll definitely be on with us down the road. So
yeah, a lot of people who cover the Yankees, I think, are a little bit busy today.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and if
No,
they're
but it
not
was
busy,
no, just saying it was just weird. Like, like I've had people not get back to me, but not people that, you know what I'm saying? Like
oh
it's
yeah,
just weird. It's just
oh
weird. And it was
I've
funny.
been I don't know about you, but I've been ignored by bigger than Brian Hoke, so I don't.
Yeah, so am I. So am I. But I don't take it personally when it's,
No, no, no,
I don't
no.
take it personally when it's somebody that I don't know,
Right, right.
big shots. But anyway, so how did the Yankees do? I mean, since the last time we spoke, how did the Yankees do this week, Peter?
So, they went to Sacramento, which is still so weird saying the Yankees went to Sacramento. And they took 2 out of 3 from the A's. And then obviously they came home and dropped 2 out of 3 to Cleveland. And a rarity this week, since Garrett Cole came back, Cole and Schlittler have been, they look like they're going to be a pretty good 1-2 punch. And they both had subpar performances in the first 2 games against Cleveland this week.
Right.
And then, good news, Carlos Rodon pitched very well yesterday, and the Yankees salvaged the finale of the series. But I thought, and we didn't know what the Aaron Judge news was going to be, but I thought after they left, Sacramento, I thought they were kind of back on track. They were they were down. They trailed the Rays by a few games. They got it down to a game and a half, and then they were a half a game the other day. So it kind of looked like things were starting to go back in the right direction. And right now, again, the Yankees are going to have to brace for life without their captain. And this happens at a time when their fiercest rival, the Boston Red Sox, come to the Bronx this weekend. And look, that doesn't matter what the names are on the field. The Yankees and the Red Sox are enough to create juice
Sure.
of its own. So we'll see. Look, again, when I say tread water, you know what? The Yankees can still beat the Red Sox 2 out of 3 without Aaron Judge. And I think that's what they're going to look for. Look, can they play? They're not going to play 700 baseball. Might not even play 650 baseball, but the Yankees still are good enough, especially when they play the bottom feeders in the American League, that I think they can get this, consistently, win more than they lose and get their captain back. But I thought the Yankees were playing better until the series against Cleveland. And obviously they didn't have Aaron Judge for those 3 games.
Well, not having Aaron Judge, again, as we said, thankfully, the fact that it's not thoracic outlet syndrome, but to talk about what Yankee fans can perhaps expect from this recovery period for Aaron Judge, we are very pleased to welcome Dr. John Paci, who is sports medicine over at Orlin and Cohen. Dr. Paci, thank you so much for joining us here on Gotham Baseball Live. I'm Mark Healey. He's Peter Schwartz. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark and Pete. Good to see you guys.
Well, Mark, if you don't mind me correcting you, it's James Paci. His brother John did play quarterback for the Jets.
Oh,
so it's kind of funny that you said John.
I have keratoconus, doctor. I have
keratoconus. Happens all the time. My father was John. My brother's John. My nephew's John. That's not a new one for me.
I'm looking at it and I said, John. Sorry, doctor.
All good.
Dr. Paci, always good to talk to you. You've been on my other shows before, so thanks for coming on at the last minute to talk about what's going on with Aaron Judge. When I first reached out to you, we thought that Aaron Judge might have been out with thoracic outlet syndrome, but it turns out it's a stress fracture of the first rib on his right side. So obviously you haven't taken a look at Aaron Judge's situation up close, but just from a general standpoint, what type of injury is this? How severe is it? And what kind of rehab is ahead of Aaron Judge as this situation proceeds?
So, stress injuries, stress fractures of bones are very common in sports. Obviously, the classic one that we see is in runners, right? They'll get it in their shins. Shin splints become stress reactions, become stress fractures, and those are quite common. We'll also see them in baseball players in their throwing arms at times. Very common to see it in the distal humerus or the medial epicondyle. Rib stress fractures in throwers we do see. Usually they're lower down though. They're more in the thoracic ribs as opposed to the cervical rib, where Judge seems to have his. And this is a different kind of injury. It's not a very common injury that we see a stress fracture in a first rib, but certainly would follow very similar treatment guidelines to any stress injury. And the first thing with that is the beauty of bone is bone likes to heal. Bone likes to make bone. So if you get sufficient rest and you have proper treatment, bones should heal. The interesting thing, and you talked about the thoracic outlet, is the first rib is often involved in thoracic outlet syndrome. So clearly that's what they were trying to differentiate between with where his pain and where his symptoms were.
And here's the other thing too, is, when Peter first reached out to me and he said, "Oh, isn't that what Matt Harvey had?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "But it's completely different for a pitcher. I'm no doctor by any stretch of the imagination. I can barely read names in front of what's in front of me on the computer." But for Jeff McNeil had a minor TOS procedure as well last year before the start of the season. So it's going to affect a pitcher far differently than it's going to affect a position player. But a stretch fracture, especially of this nature, there's a lot of social media doctors out there. So that's why Peter thought it was a great idea to have you on, because you're an actual doctor and you've seen these types of injuries before. But a lot of people, the baseball people have put out that, it's 4 to 6 weeks. But really, from what I understand, and you can clarify perhaps, is that that's 4 to 6 weeks of rest, and then they're going to redo the imaging again. Is that correct?
Right. So, they're going to follow this very closely on imaging to make sure that the bone heals, obviously, before stressing it again, right? Aaron Judge is a giant of a human being and a very, very strong individual. So the stress that he's putting across his bones and in his body is quite different to what I'm going to do out on the golf course later today, right? So, you really want to make sure this thing is rock solid before you let him start hitting home runs again, so you don't wind up right back where you started. And the interesting thing, as you said, Mark, he's not a pitcher. And it seems from the reports that it really bothered him more when he was at the plate than in the field, right? So there's something with his mechanics that are putting stress on that rib, which caused the injury. Now, one of the things that we see quite often, and really it's something we've picked up on more since COVID, is that a lot of patients who have these stress-related injuries are deficient in things like vitamin D. So anytime we have an athlete who has a stress injury to a bone, we run a whole metabolic panel of labs to look for things like low vitamin D, iron deficiencies, things around thyroid and parathyroid hormones. So there's a whole panel and list of things that we look at beyond just the images to see if there's anything that we can adjust to get them to heal faster. And you'd be surprised how abysmally low some of these teenagers are in their vitamin D, and that once we supplement them, they heal like gangbusters. So I'm sure they're working through all of those kinds of things with him as well to do everything they can to get him back on the field as safely and quickly as possible.
Dr. Paci, when they say they're going to take a look at the imaging again in 4 to 6 weeks, I know they're looking for improvement, but what are the specific things that they'll be looking for when they take a look at those images again in 4 to 6 weeks?
So each imaging modality is a little bit different. The CT scan, the CAT scan looks at bone very well. in terms of its bony architecture and healing. So a new CAT scan can show that the bone is healed. A new MRI would show whether or not there's continued edema in the bone, which is like swelling and aggravation within the bone. Usually, when you have a stress fracture, it actually starts as a stress reaction that you can pick up early on with an MRI. You'll see that inflamed state of the bone, and then eventually it cracks if you keep kind of pushing through. And that's where the CAT scan, I'm sure, was utilized to see the crack in the rib. It's actually very difficult to get good imaging of ribs in general. So they've done a phenomenal job to get to the bottom of this.
Well, look, one last thing for me, Dr. Paci, and thanks so much for joining us today and giving us some time. You know, as you said, you know, he's a giant, and you know, he is such a massive human being, and you know, there's so much. They talk about, my son talks about this all the time because we always argue about, you know, the way certain athletes need to be today, right? There's not a lot of there's so much max effort on every single pitch and on every single swing. And is that something that you believe that possibly could have led? I mean, obviously there was an injury. He hurt himself, but obviously the max effort swing, as you said, he said that that was bothering him more when he was hitting than being in the field or throwing. Is that max effort, is that something that needs to be adjusted in Major League Baseball, in your opinion? Or is that something that it just, like, it happens? This is sports and stuff like that happens.
So we talk about this all the time with the Tommy John epidemic, right? That I'm going to throw gas until I have no gas left and then bring up the next guy. And that's the nature of baseball today, right? Change of speed is a rarity in a pitcher anymore, right? They're just all gas all the time until they flame out, and then the next man is up. And it's no different at bat. It's modern warfare to a certain extent, right? You're fighting fire with fire. And unfortunately, this is what happens. You wind up with these types of injuries. You wind up with Tommy John injuries. And Major League Baseball takes that into account with their rosters now. But you hate to see a star like Aaron Judge go down because of a stress injury.
Dr. Paci, last thing for me, I'm going to go off the subject here, a non-Aaron Judge question. We have reached the summer, and we've talked about this a lot on some of the other shows you've been on with me, but we've reached the summer months, and the kids are coming off their spring seasons, and they're getting ready for a lot of travel baseball here during the summer. And you've seen a million situations where kids get hurt playing baseball. As all of these kids get ready for what should be a very busy summer of baseball, what's the most important thing or two that parents need to worry about when their kids embark on what will be a very lengthy schedule over the summer?
So, obviously we talk about pitch counts and we talk about volume, and that just gets ever more important when you get into these situations. You get into showcase situations and things along those lines. The parents have to look out for their kids, and it's hard not to get caught up in it. We're all excited to see our kids out on the field. I have kids that play lacrosse instead of baseball, and they're out doing it too. But we're very cognizant of taking care of the recovery piece, right? Making sure they're getting enough rest, making sure they're getting enough sleep at night, making sure they stretch after they play. The throwers too, you got to stretch that throwing arm out. You got to stretch your legs. You got to do your cool down stuff. Don't just run right from the field to the ice cream shop or right back to the hotel room, right? Take that 5 or 10 minutes after a game and do a proper cool down. You'll be that much better the next day, the next week, and hopefully be able to stay out of my office, because it's the last place that we want to see baseball players.
Right.
No doubt. Dr. Paci, thanks so much for joining us, and always great to talk to you. Have a great summer, and hopefully we'll talk again somewhere down the road.
Sounds great, guys. Have a great weekend. Appreciate you having me on.
You too, Dr. Paci. Thank you
Dr.
again.
James Paci from Orlin and Cohen joining us to talk a little Aaron Judge. And, we got some of those, questions, a lot of the questions answered, Mark, about, the Judge situation. And listen, the bottom line is it's going to take a substantial amount of time for Judge to recover. He's going to have to stay out of activity. He's going to have to just relax, and the Yankees are just going to be as patient as they possibly can, and they're not going to put him back on that field until they feel he is 100%. There's no reason to ruin his future over trying to rush him back for one season, in my opinion.
No, no question. And look, and you said, look, they've done it before. They've tread water. Do I look? They're going to have trouble scoring runs. They had trouble scoring runs anyway because he's
Right.
been struggling since like injuring himself because he's had it for a while. And this is an offense that look. I'll say it. I'll say it again. You and I think are on the same page. Sometimes you have to adjust. You have to adapt. You have to overcome. The big bombers are not there. They're just not. So you gotta hit line drives. You gotta put the ball in play. You gotta steal some bases. These guys. Look, I know it's all about analytics and all that nonsense. See the ball, hit the ball.
Yeah.
You have these at bats where you just. Where's the pitch recognition? Where's the strike zone, awareness? And again, like you and I are not hitters, but again, like I get it, I understand it, but all you have to do is talk to one of these guys, right? One of these old school guys. I remember Chris Chambliss when he was a roving hitting instructor for the Mets before he became hitting coach, and obviously he's a great Yankee. Billy Martin, one of Billy Martin's favorite players of all time. I used to say to him, because I was working on a story about my cousin Timmy, who played for CW Post, was really good player. I think he hit like 375 for his college career. And he was saying to me, one of the things that, I think that guys have trouble with, unless they play in the Cape Cod League that uses wooden bats, a lot of these guys have trouble making the transition from hitting with an aluminum bat and hitting with a wooden bat. It's different, and again, I don't remember exactly the differences, but it had something to do with the barrel and the weight and whatever. So I went up to Chris Chambliss, and I was like, oh, I'm going to have this really interesting conversation about a wooden bat, aluminum bat, and he's going to like lay it out for me. And Chris just looked at me and he said, young man, because I was young then.
Yeah.
He said, young man, you can either hit or you cannot hit. He said, good hitters hit, bad hitters don't. And all that is an excuse. Now, I was kind of hoping for a little bit more of a, like this deep conversation. But I mean, I got to be honest, he's one of the best hitters ever. Right? I mean, doesn't that make sense?
Yeah, and listen, I think you probably, Mark, would have gotten that answer from just about any professional hitter. They probably all would have probably told you the same thing. I would imagine Keith Hernandez would have told you the same thing. I would have thought, Don Mattingly would have told you the same thing. Go up and down the list of Tony Gwynn, Rod Carew, down the list. Look, you can either hit it or you cannot hit it. That's the subject that comes up also when people talk about the steroid era. Yeah, these guys were, taking steroids. They still have to hit the baseball. They still have to have the hand-eye coordination to turn their body and hit the ball. So I'm not surprised that Chris Chambliss said that to you. That doesn't come as a surprise to me. But
well, it's just you see Keith. Keith says stuff like that all night. He's like, "What are you doing?" He goes, why are you looking at a pitch, a 2-on-1 fastball? Like it's not that he's not a scientist too, at the plate. It's just a better kind of science. Yeah. This is a guy, and again, I understand that great players are not always great teachers. Like I get that, but Keith has been getting himself in trouble with the broadcast, with the Mets hitting coaches for years. Dave Hudgens, who used to be a hitting coach for the Mets. Used to, when he got fired, he was like, oh, those guys in the booth, blah, 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 blah. But I mean, who are you going to listen to if you're a player? Are you going to listen to a guy who never hit a big league fastball in his life, who's showing you graphs and and I know you and I, everybody, when we say this, they're like, oh, old man yelling at clouds. Yeah. But, you see it every day and it's like, just grip it and rip it, man.
That's it. And look, we've talked about a lot about the Yankees on the show today, and obviously rightfully so because of the Judge news. But we can't close the show without talking about the other team in town, and
We
that's
have
the
to.
Mets. And they're coming off of losing 2 out of 3 in Seattle. They're going
Yeah.
to be in San Diego. Give me your temperature on where the Mets were this week, as they are 27-35 in 6 games out of a wild card spot. What does Dr. Healey think about the Mets right now?
Oh, Dr. Healey thinks the patient is in trouble. Um, you know what it is? It just changes every day. Like one day they look, like they salvage that last game of the season, last game of the series against the Mariners. Um, they finally got a really good pitching performance out of Freddie Peralta. Although I am not one of the vocal Freddie Peralta critics. I didn't think when they got him that he was going to be this ace. He's a solid pitcher. He gets himself in trouble. He gives up some home runs. I think that there's a tremendous amount of pressure on Freddie Peralta right now to be an ace. He's not an ace. And when you have an offense that doesn't perform consistently, and you have a guy like, Bo Bichette, had a great day, in the finale against the Mariners, 4 for 4, 3 RBI, but, he needs to be Bo Bichette. If Bo Bichette's Bo Bichette, they could start winning some games and stringing some wins together. But until they're at 500, until they are, they have a series with the Padres in San Diego this weekend that starts tonight. Christian Scott's on the mound against your old pal, Mr. King there, who's having a pretty good season. Again, a good pitcher when he's healthy. Christian Scott has actually pitched pretty well too. Hasn't had a lot of luck because the team just doesn't score when he pitches. But, it's like you asked me one day, it's like, man, we have a shot. And then the next day it's like, they're horrible. So I think that until they get to 500, until they, I don't care how many games out they are of the third wild card. I don't care how many games out they are from the NL East. The NL East is over. I don't have any problem saying that. But until they get to 500, and at least, they can't win 5-6 games in a row and start taking series in a row. You just gotta look at it. Our old friend Boomer Esiason, he has the same approach, depending on the sport, whether if it's hockey, it's one period, one shift, 1 period, 1 game. And with football, it's, one series, one half, one game.
Right.
Same thing with baseball. Dude, look at the game in front of you. One at bat, 1 inning. You can't look. We don't do gambling on this show. We don't tell you who to put your prop bets in. We don't do any of that. And look, for the folks like our buddy JJ John Jastrzemski, who does more power to you. But that's not what we do. We look what we try to do. And what you do a fantastic job at as well is just, tell the truth about what we're watching. Right. Tell the truth about what we're hearing. And for me, until they get to 500, Peter, to me, it's like every day the opinion changes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Look, I think that's the baseline. You get the 500 and go from there. 6 games out is not an insurmountable amount of games with about more than half the season still left to play. So maybe they can get on a roll. But speaking of a team that is on a roll, we don't just talk about the Mets and Yankees here on the show. We've talked a little minor league baseball here on the show, but we got to give a shout out to the St. John's Red Storm. It was a big basketball season for St. John's, but the baseball team has reached the NCAA Super Regional. And this is a really cool story for a couple of reasons. Number one, also, 14 players from Long Island is on this St. John's team. And that is, a cool thing for Long Island residents in of itself. But how about this, Mark? This team was 1-10 on March 4th. 1-10. You talk about the Mets falling so far behind and maybe having a chance to get back into it. St. John's was 1-10. They go on to win 35 of their next 49 games, and they're in the final 16 for the first time since 2012. And they're going to play Alabama in a best of 3 starting tomorrow night. So best of luck to St. John's.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the Rick Pitino effect, the
Yeah.
Mike Rapoli effect, my old high school classmate, Mike Rapoli. Um,
Yeah.
what's interesting about St. John's, right, is that I've always felt, and the Mets have actually done some work with, and I don't know about the Yankees. You might know more about that, but I know the Mets have made some efforts over the years to work with the St. John's program.
Hmm.
I remember when the Queens Kings
Yes.
left town. They left their situation for St. John's, and that's how the Brooklyn Cyclones came to be. Um, we don't talk a lot about college baseball. Gotham baseball for years and years and years. Chip Arminitis was a guy who was our college baseball editor. I can't afford a college baseball editor anymore, but he always went out of his way to cover college baseball. And we Todd Frazier, when he was at Rutgers, was on our All America team. All Gotham team, I should say. So it's fantastic to see a local college program like St. John's get some love and do so well on the national stage. I mean, they got to play at Alabama. That's a tough spot,
Yep. Yep.
certainly, but let's roll the tide. You got to root for St. John's in that spot, no
Yeah.
question. And
And it brings back memories. It brings back
thanks
memories
for
of,
suggesting it too,
oh,
to
no
bring it
problem.
up
But it
before
brings
the
back
show.
memories of Frank Viola,
Yep,
because Frank Viola went to St. John's. I bring him up also because selfishly, he's also a graduate of East Meadow High School, where my wife and I went to high school. So it's great vibes for St. John's, and best of luck, and hopefully they can advance as far as they could possibly do that. And best of luck over the weekend.
absolutely, and it's always great. We I don't know. Do we have a confirmed guest for next week, Paul, Peter?
Yes, I believe we were supposed to have Roger McDowell on last week,
Right.
and he had to switch, but we will have Roger McDowell on next Friday to talk about his new book. And obviously, with the anniversary of the '86 World Series team, it'll be a great time to
Yeah.
reminisce with him about that magical year for the Mets and their fans. And it was wild here in this area in '86 when the Mets won the World Series.
Absolutely. Peter, once again, have a great weekend. And folks, have a great time watching some baseball this weekend. Hopefully you get it in during the Knicks game tonight. And that's it for us here on Gotham Baseball Live.
Let's go Knicks.